A young man seeking ancient wisdom traveled to the far ends of the earth to consult a holy man about the meaning of life. The world, the sage said, lies on 4 columns, which are supported by 4 enormous elephants. On what, O wise one, do the elephants stand? Asked the student. The elephants, the sage replied, stand on the back of the great cosmic turtle. Master, on what does the great cosmic turtle stand? The cosmic turtle stands on the back of an even greater turtle. But on what does the greater turtle stand? On the back of a yet greater turtle. What does that turtle stand on? On the back of an even greater turtle than all the rest. And on what? Listen, Buster, it's turtles all the way down. The journey to the east, seeking wisdom, has been a persistent theme of religious thought for more than 2 centuries. We need only think of the Beatles and their quest for enlightenment in India to be reminded of the breadth of this appeal, especially during the 60s and 70s. But remember, the Beats were also deeply influenced by Eastern religion, especially Hinduism and Buddhism. Within our tradition, it goes back at least to the Transcendentalist movement. Henry David Thoreau, for example, wrote this in Walden. In the morning, I bathe my intellect in the stupendous and cosmogonal philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita, whose composition years of the gods have elapsed, and in comparison with which our modern world and its literature seem puny and trivial. Ralph Waldo Emerson was similarly entranced by this newly discovered set of scriptures from the East. He said, the Indian teaching, through its clouds of legends, has yet a simple and grand religion, like a queenly continent seen through a rich veil. It teaches to speak of truth, love others, and to disclose trifles. The East is grand and makes Europe appear the land of trifles. All is soul, and the soul is Vishnu. Cheerful and noble is the genius of this cosmogony. The study of comparative religion was promoted by many of the ministers in our Unitarian and Universalist traditions. One of the earlier efforts was by James Freeman Clarke in his 1862 lecture to a gathering of Unitarian ministers known as the Ministerial Conference in Berry Street. I happen to be the scribe, so I'm going to quote a few things from this lecture series. His title was Universality of the Christian Religion as Contrasted with Other Forms of Faith, Ethnic, or Unlimited to Race or Nation. The spirit of that quest is captured in our opening words by Theodore Parker. Be ours a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere, its creed, all truth. There's much to be gained by considering how Eastern religions differ from those of the West. But sometimes we're tempted to imagine that all truth must rest anywhere other than our own traditions. There are those, for example, who feel so burned by their experiences of Christianity or Judaism that they think any beliefs on the other side of the fence must be better than those to which they have been exposed of their own traditions. But in fact, every religious tradition is endlessly diverse and contains within itself a wide variety of practices, beliefs, and ways of living. It can be too easy to be tempted into extreme comparisons. And we should note that the popular understanding of Eastern religions has been forged in part through the contrast with Christianity, as though Christianity was the standard by which all other religions were to be understood. Hence the debate over is Confucianism a religion? They don't have a God. How about Buddhism, etc. In an interfaith gathering earlier this week, one of my rabbinic friends suggested as a generalization that Christianity is more concerned about right belief, orthodoxy, we would say, while Judaism, for example, among other religious traditions, is more concerned about right action, orthopraxy, to use a technical term, praxis or practice. And as Unitarian Universalists, we tend to side with the latter approach. Deeds, not creeds, is how we often put our commitments. A common temptation in religious dialogue among different traditions is to pick the best of one's own tradition and to compare it with the worst of another tradition. So today we hear this a lot in denunciations of Islam, as if Christianity and Judaism were inevitably and invariably religions of peace, while Islam is determined to conquer the world on behalf of their religion and subject everyone to it. In return, Muslims, quite properly, can point to missionaries like Franklin Graham, who proposed to convert the entire world to Christianity. And then, the flip side of this is that there are those of us, this is a particular temptation for religious liberals, who hold that all things from the European tradition are inferior to the things of the Eastern traditions. When we're tempted to make invidious comparisons in either directions, it's wise to remember our first principle, a commitment to the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Or as Richard Gilbert puts it, we are all more human than otherwise. Bearing these cautions in mind, one value of studying other religions is that it helps us to gain perspective on our own traditions. Not that one is superior and another inferior, but that there are bits of truth shining through that illuminate some of our own blind spots. So it's useful to see if non-Western religions could shed some light, for example, on the seemingly intractable conflict in our own traditions between the theory of evolution and creationism. A recent Pew survey suggested that this might have some fruitful results. It asked whether evolution is the best explanation for the origins of life on Earth. The most likely to agree with that statement, 81%, were Buddhists. Among Hindus, 80%, among Jews, 77%. On the other side, only 24% of evangelicals, 22% of Mormons, and 8% of Jehovah's Witnesses agreed with that proposition. So at first blush, it might appear that the science versus religion wars would be won by science among non-Christians, and that, of course, is the rather simplistic and overly optimistic view of Buddhism from the reading this morning. On the other hand, this represents the thoughts and feelings of the American public. If you do a survey in India, where 80% of Indians are Hindu, almost half of the respondents to the survey believe that life on Earth was created by God and has always existed in its current form. It's quite different from 80% of the United States who believe that evolution is the best explanation. 1/3 believe that life had evolved over time, but that it was guided by God. And only 20%, 1/5, believed that a purely naturalistic evolutionary explanation was correct. And Hinduism, after all, is a religion with a plenitude of gods, emanating from Brahman, the one, the all, the divine seed of light, as our responsive reading this morning put it. That's from the Bhagavad Gita. So it's hardly surprising that the gods would be seen to have a role in the way the world is. And if you look at Hindu creation stories, you find that Vishnu and Brahma created the world, whether by voice or by hand. So while Hindus in America might find evolution attractive and compelling, that doesn't mean that Hinduism as such necessarily supports that view. Of course, Hinduism itself is a misnomer. Hinduism was defined by the West as the religion of the people on the other side of the Indus, hence the name Hindu. But of course there is a great diversity of practices and beliefs on the other side of the river. And unlike Christianity, there is no single source of authority, no single Bible, no pope, no denominational leadership to decide what is in and what is out of Hinduism. In fact, one of the features of Hinduism is its ability to incorporate any religious tradition, including, to some degree, Christianity. Jesus can be understood as an incarnation, as Vishnu was an incarnation of God. Buddhists, on the other hand, have taken a much less traditional view about the questions of where we come from and where are we going. They care about practice. So the Buddha told his disciples, this is probably a very bad translation, conjecture about the origin and so on of the world is an unconjecturable that is not to be conjectured about, that would bring madness and vexation to anyone who conjectured about it. Don't even think about it. Or in another context he said, you don't understand this life, how will you understand another life? As our reading this morning suggested, there need not be a conflict between Buddhist teaching and the history of evolution. But the main point is that Buddhism is about practice, about learning to overcome suffering, not about particular beliefs, and that inquiring about origins, asking where do we come from, is ultimately of little meaning compared to learning to live this life as it is given to us. On the other hand, Buddhism contains a great deal of diversity as well. And as Buddhism spread from India to Tibet to Southeast Asia to China and Japan, it took on some of the beliefs and ideas and worshiping patterns of the nations to which it spread. Confucianism, a tradition that was first formulated in the West by Jesuit missionaries in the 16th century, has far less concern with gods than do the Western traditions that come from the Bible. Like Buddhism, Confucianism is much more about right living and right relationship than about speculative explorations. And therefore, it's less necessary to see a conflict between science and traditional beliefs. S.R. Calthrop, another of our Unitarian ministers, offers this quotation in his 1873 Berry Street essay to his fellow ministers. My doctrine, said Confucius, is one of an all-pervading unity. Two great affirmations are welded in one in our text. First, that the spirit of life acts according to law, and second, that the foundations of law, scientific law, is the spirit of life. Calthrop continues, the first affirmation is the direct opposite of a religious error, the second of a scientific error. The religious error is that life is lawless. The scientific error is that law is lifeless. Be ours a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere, its creed all truth. We religious liberals are often scandalized by the refusal of Christian fundamentalists to accept the truth of the theory of evolution. We should realize, though, that almost every religious tradition has been affected by one form of fundamentalism or another. We are nowadays most sensitive to Islamic fundamentalism, which is an attempt to go back to the supposed purity of doctrine during the era of Muhammad, and which ignores the enormous scientific, literary, and legal progress that was made in Islam during the era, what we call the Middle Ages, when Europe was essentially not a place that learning was advancing. Jewish fundamentalists are ardently opposed to making peace with the Palestinians because they believe God gave them the whole land of Israel and that all Palestinians, therefore, are interlopers. Buddhist fundamentalists in Burma are engaged in a battle with Burmese who are not Buddhist. And this, from a religion that we like to believe is a religion of peace and nonviolence. And there's some risk that fundamentalist Hindus, nationalists, will come to power in India in the next election. You may have heard just a week or two ago that Penguin Books India was forced to stop selling a scholarly study of Hinduism in response to a lawsuit by Hindu fundamentalists. So Christian fundamentalism is certainly not the only form in which reaction against modernity occurs. And science, too, can become a form of fundamentalism. The new atheists Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, among others, have declared that science can answer all of the questions worth asking, and that all religions are false and indeed dangerous. But in fact, of course, science tells us what is, but not what ought to be. Darwin himself, it turns out, crossed the line from description to prescription. Tony Campolo, a liberal evangelical writing in Tikkun magazine, explains what's wrong with Darwinism in a way that religious liberals should attend to. He says, Darwin was a racist, and his racist theories have had an enormous impact on American thinking. In terms of science, Darwin's account may be solid indeed, but value-free? Nothing could be further from the truth, and that's where the problem lies. Darwin's writings have been used to lend credibility to the prevalent racism of the 19th century, and when reinforced by Herbert Spencer, Darwin's philosopher, have supported an extreme laissez-faire political ideology that legitimized the neglect of the suffering poor by the ruling elite. Those who disagree about Darwin being a racist probably didn't attend to the full title of his most famous book, On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. And if you then go on to read his next book, The Descent of Man, they would probably be shocked to learn that among Darwin's scientifically based principles was the elimination of, quote, the Negro and Australian peoples, which he considered to be savage races whose continued survival was hindering the progress of civilization. In his second book, Darwin ranked races in terms of what he believed was their nearness and likeness to gorillas, and then went on to propose the extermination of races he defined as inferior. Science can't answer questions about how we ought to lead our lives or what policies we ought to adopt as a nation. It can provide information, but not wisdom. S.R. Calthrop referred to this dichotomy in his 1873 Berry Street essay, which I cited earlier. General laws, that is scientific laws, do not bring up my children, I bring them up. General laws do not walk up and down the room with my baby in their arms when he is sick, do not put him in the corner when he's naughty and feel twice as badly as he does when he cries in consequence. General laws do not go on tiptoe through the darkened room where my child, tossed on his fevered bed, has fallen into the blessed sleep which will bring him back to life again. General laws do not feel the great gap, the huge chasm which a tiny baby's grave makes. No. It takes the tender father and mother hearts, the love force that is in those hearts to do and to feel all of this. And general laws, sciences, cannot instruct us on how to take care of the joy of living right here, right now. We always find ourselves thrown into the middle between the ultimate unknown that comes before everything and the ultimate unknown that comes after everything, after us. We're meaning-making creatures, and we wish we could penetrate to the beginning of everything and explain everything, but we can't. We are the ones, each of us, who must make meaning of our own lives. We don't need to deny the intricacies of our descent or the reality of faith to find meaning, and above all, to make meaning. There's a grandeur in our living right here in the middle, right now. Be ours a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere, its creed, all truth. Mary Oliver, from her recent book of poems, Redbird, another everyday poem. Every day I consider the lilies, how they are dressed, and the ravens, how they are fed, and how each of these is a miracle of Lord love and of sorrow. For the lilies in their bright dresses cannot last, but wrinkle fast and fall. And the little ravens in their windy nest rise up in such pleasure at the sight of fresh meat that makes their lives sweet. And what a puzzle it is that such brevity, the lavish clothes, the rooty food, makes the world so full, so good. May we live in that goodness. May we give our lives to that goodness. And may we spread it everywhere our steps may take it. May it be so.